Chrome Pipes and Pinstripes, episode 212. Max Grundy moved to Kansas? All right, folks, hello and welcome to episode 212 of Chrome Pipes and Pinstripes. I am your host, Royboy from royboyproductions.com. That's the website where you can find hot rod and custom car show photos from all over the country. Over 100,000 images of hot rods and custom cars, car shows, drag races, hill climbs, dirt drags, and now rumbles. From all over the country. Kind of forgot where I was going with that. But they're all on the website. They're free. And they're there because I want to encourage you to get out and drive your old cars and go meet some cool people and do some cool stuff. Life is going to be over before you know it. It's short, and you got to enjoy it while you can. So get out there and drive those cars. So this episode is with my good buddy, Max Grundy. About 2 weeks ago, I ran over to his new house, which is about 2 hours away from me. They moved from California to Kansas. We talk all about that. We talk about art. We talk about all kinds of fun stuff. I think you're going to enjoy this one with Max Grundy. So we are here in Iola, Kansas, the new home of Max Grundy Family and Art. So it's been a while since we've had you on the podcast, and of course I'll link in the show notes. If anybody wants to go back and listen to the old episode, we can hear backstory there. You know, what got you into art and all that kind of stuff. We talked about a lot of fun stuff on that one. But here, I just want to kind of catch up the last few years and talk about what got you into Kansas.
Yeah, I think after 16 years of Southern California, we kind of just got to the point where we were kind of over the California scene, I guess. We were, it's a great place. There's a lot of positives, but the negatives started to outweigh the positives. And it was getting a bit much with the homeless problem, the drugs, the crime, the litter. It was just too much, and we kind of slowly realized over time that the world has changed, whether people want to admit it or not. You don't really need to live in a certain area like you once did, Yeah. It used to be you'd go to California to pursue a career in something, and some careers, are still the same, acting, that kind of stuff. But you really don't, if you're a self-employed artist or car builder, you don't really have to be confined to that area. And the government regulations have and are continuing to increase and be less welcoming to car builders and people into old things like we are. So we just took the initiative to remove ourselves from the equation and started looking in the Midwest. We originally started, I've always had a love of the Midwest. Been doing a show in Iowa for
Torque Fest, yeah. I think that's where we first probably met.
Okay, yeah, that sounds right. But John puts on a really good show up there.
Yeah.
And I've just always loved eastern Iowa. I just think it's beautiful and got these amazing rolling hills. And, it's just nice, It just kind of what you imagine America to be,
Right.
And so I've always enjoyed trips there. And my wife's brother recently, about a couple of years ago, bought a house in Missouri. And so we were kind of looking over there in Missouri around what our options were. And we looked Missouri up and down, top and bottom. And Missouri's a great state, really nice people, and really the scenery is beautiful.
Yeah.
Natural beauty, and the Ozarks are amazing. But a house didn't really click with us. We didn't really kind of connect with an area.
Yeah.
And then on a whim, we sort of, our real estate agent that we were working with at the time, she says, there's this listing, and she knew we liked mid-century modern homes. She said, there's this listing in Kansas, if you want to go look at it. It was right on the edge of the bubble of where she did houses.
Right.
I said, well, heck, we're here. We might as well check it out. So we started driving. I think where we were staying, it was a 2-hour drive from where we were at in Missouri, the place we were staying.
Right.
And so we just came to this house, and it was just like,
2 hours across Kansas is a lot of distance.
2
hours across LA could be 30 minutes.
Is Riverside to LA.
Right. It could be a pretty close drive. So.
Oh man, I do not miss the traffic. I mean, you could be driving around town and you're stuck in a line of traffic.
Yeah.
I just could not do that anymore. It was not the direction I wanted my life to go. But
yeah. Well, so you drive a couple hours out in here, and for some people, they look around, they see nothing. Other people look around and feel the wide open space. I mean, it's different for every person.
It is, yeah. And I think, maybe 10 years ago, I wouldn't have seen it, here. But I tell people the most common thing people ask around here, what brought you to Iowa, Kansas? Why did you choose here? Of all things? And we saw the house and we just fell in love with it. 1963, mid-century home. Just, it's like saying, why would you drive an old car when you could drive a new car? And it's just because old cars are much cooler, and old houses are much cooler, They just have much more sensibility towards materials, sensibility towards space. They're designed for a purpose. This house, everywhere you go in the house, it seems like you're private. Every room is private. Everything is warm and welcoming in each room that you go in. It's a little bit messy right now because of we're still kind of moving in, but we like that the house is designed as opposed to just another stacked cube with no thought into it.
There's the whole McMansion thing. I mean, there's a lot of those homes that just they have all the things that people want. The overhead showers, the blah 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 blah. But none of them have a good vibe to them that I've ever been in.
Yeah, and I think that starts with the materials a lot of the time. These new homes, they're built with new trees,
right?
But these older homes, 50s and early 60s homes, they're built with old growth redwood, and if those boards are dry, they'll last forever. And I think you build anything that's worthwhile. You start with good materials, and then it leads into a good design. And then it ends with a good product, and you kind of follow that along the line. It's like with car building, you try to do the same thing. You try to use the best materials you can. You try to not skip steps,
Right.
And hopefully it aids in a better end product,
Or a lot of people don't understand that aren't into cars like we are is, you could drive a little car like my 2014 Honda I drove over here today. I got 35 miles a gallon.
Yeah.
Cruise was set. It was comfortable the whole way. It was fun.
Heater works great.
Yeah, heater works great.
AC works great.
Or I could have driven the 63 Galaxy. The heater does work, but there's an air leak on the passenger side that I've been meaning to fix for a couple of years. So there's cold air coming in the wintertime, and there's something that feels better about that car, and I can't put a number on it. I can't describe it except to say that car feels right to drive. This car is just conveyance. And it's kind of the same thing. It's like those new houses are just shelter.
Yeah,
but these houses feel better.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's also with old cars, there's always a sense of adventure too. When you drive an old car, it makes the mundane interesting.
What's the smell?
You could
What's that sound?
Yeah, exactly. Is that noise coming out of my car?
Right.
I mean, you can't even listen to your radio when you're in a car because the car is the radio. I mean, that's how I feel. I would never put an old car with a radio. I have done it before, but I don't think I'll ever do it again because that's not the point. The point is it's kind of an adventure. I think it taps into something kind of ancient in our DNA. It's a sort of hunter-gatherer. We're out and you might break down, and there's a little bit of a rumbling, and you hear all the smell, you hear and smell all the smells, all the sounds along the way, and it's not just a sterile. New cars are comfortable, and if I'm driving cross country, I love to have a new car because I got no worries, I got total comfort. All I got to do is pay for gas, but it's not as fun.
I've told people for years, I would not mind a self-driving option when I'm going from Salina, Kansas to Denver. I've done it 200 or 300 times. There's nothing I'm going to see on that road. So if I could kick back and sleep for 6 hours and maybe leave at midnight and show up in the morning someplace in Denver, that'd be worth it. But
Denver's an interesting city. What do you do in Denver so much?
Well, the Hot Rod Hill Climb was just west of Denver, about 45
I've heard
minutes.
good things about that show.
And I've got a bunch of friends that live all along the Front Range. Denver, Fort Collins, Colorado Springs.
Yeah.
My car club is based in Colorado Springs, so we take the old 2-lane roads now because I live about a mile off of Highway 50. It runs all the way through and goes to Pueblo, and that puts me about 30 minutes from Colorado Springs. So I can take the 65-mile-an-hour 2-lane highway all the way out there and just cruise. So whether I'm in the old car or the new car, I mean, it's not the frenetic pace of the interstate going 75, 80 mile an hour all day long. It's just there's something a little more leisurely about it.
Sure, yeah.
And it takes 10 to 15 minutes longer. It's not that big deal, you know.
Definitely worth the better view to look at.
Oh, yeah.
In my life, I can't tell you how many drives I've taken where the difference was 10 to 15 minutes, but the aesthetic difference was, a million times better.
Oh, they nailed it in the movie Cars.
Yeah, they sure did.
When they're talking about 66 versus just cutting through the hillside with the interstate,
sometimes it's a matter of just literally minutes to take a different route that's more scenic. But I think a lot in those terms this day, and I think that a lot of people wouldn't get old cars or get old houses for that reason, because they're so concerned about the destination, not the journey, and I think that that's a lot of what our culture is surrounded in, is we're caught up in the moment, I think, a little bit more versus I got to get to here to here. I compare it a lot with riding an old car is sort of like a go-kart versus the new car is kind of like taking the subway.
Okay.
It's like the subway gets you there, you can look out the window and look at the scenery, but it's like, go-kart's an adventure. You're seeing all the sights, but you're smelling all the smells. You got your adrenaline going. It's kind of like, firing a gun. An old car is like firing a gun. It's a little bit of an adrenaline rush.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a drug-free drug high.
I've talked to my friend Randy about, when we go somewhere in our old cars, if we make 5 or 6 stops and we make the adventure as much fun as the destination, if you break down and don't get to the destination, that stinks. But you're going to have a story someday. You're going to have adventure along the way.
Yeah.
And all the time, like when I did that 48 state trip, I talk about it all the time, but when I broke down, that made the whole trip. Because the struggle of overcoming the engine breaking down in Northern California and how am I going to finish this thing, that gave a narrative to the whole trip that otherwise it was like, I just drove around the country in my old car. And something about that made it more memorable, made it more enjoyable, and made it much more of a feat when I finished the trip.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. I can remember all the times I've broken down on road trips.
Yeah.
Out in the middle of Texas, changing a flat tire. We had a leaf spring break in Texas too. We always have an accident in Texas.
But Texas is like half the country.
That's because of the size.
It is so. What do they say? El Paso is closer to LA than it is Dallas.
I believe
like
that. Well, I know that when we would drive from Riverside to Austin for the Lone Star Roundup, when you get to El Paso, you're halfway there.
Okay.
And so the other half, the other 12 hours,
is all Texas.
And that's only halfway through Texas.
Right. Yeah, it's not even. Yeah,
it's not even the whole.
Exactly. You pulled a camper out there a couple times, didn't you?
Oh yeah. We used to take the family out before I had my kids being so big. We would take them out, and my daughter had, I think, 3 birthdays at Lone Star Roundup.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she had the first year. The first year, I don't think she made it, but I think we took them like when she was 2 and 3 and 4. She had birthdays there, but yeah, we would take the camper. We'd haul the whole camper out. Eventually, it got just more economic to just fly out and set up that way.
Yeah.
But if you want to take your family and you want to have a place for them to stay, a camper is the way to go. So,
especially when they're little, you can't really. It's easy to go put them in the camper, when they're little. Than if they're a little bit bigger, they're going to want to wander off and stuff. So, might as well just.
It seems like the hard age is like 2, 3, 4. And part the way through 5, but after 5, it seems like they're kind of a little more manageable. You can control them a little bit better.
Are you planning on doing Lone Star this year?
Yep. I'll be there for sure. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to make it. I started a new job 2 years ago, and I have less vacation than I used to. A week less.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm kind of picking and choosing. It's like I've done Roundup about a decade straight. It's been a great time, but going to save a little time to go. Like this year, we flew out to Flaming Gorge, Utah.
Oh, really?
Went out to the snow rally there because one of the Salt City Throttlers Car Club, Woody, his family, his wife's family owns Flaming Gorge Resort. So they do a 4th of July party out there because it's his birthday's on the 3rd. We go whitewater rafting one day. We go tour the dam of the reservoir. And then we go drive flatheads and banger cars, 1,300-foot elevation change up and down all around the lake. It's a blast. So then a couple years ago, he goes, well, there's a 3-day weekend in January. Why don't we do the event out here? And they made a track and called it the Snow Rally. So bring out your old hot rods. It's not timed. It's just for fun, but it's basically an autocross course through the snow. And it was a blast. There was only 20 cars showed up because literally a snowstorm rolled in just east of us and cut off most of the Colorado people from making it unless they got there early. But it was still a blast. So we go out to Utah twice a year now, although this time we flew out, and that was, for time's sake, it was nice to be there in 5 hours versus 14.
It's hard to beat the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, the time of the flying really helps out. A little fun fact for you, I actually grew up in Flaming Gorge.
I did not realize that.
Yeah, Flaming Gorge. I grew up in a little town called Bountiful, Utah.
Okay.
Just a suburb of Salt Lake City. And we would do two, when I say grow up, I grew up going to Flaming Gorge.
Right, yeah.
That was, Flaming Gorge and Lake Powell, that was our places
Okay.
we went. So we did a couple fishing trips a year to Flaming Gorge. We did a boating and fishing trip to Lake Powell once a year. And because that was further away.
Okay.
From where I grew up, Flaming Gorge was only, like 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
Close to 3 hours maybe. But a lot of nice cars through Price, Utah. When you go
Okay.
through, there's a lot of old projects. At least there was when I was growing up. They were everywhere. But yeah, that's a funny thing to hear you talk about because I would love to attend that event out there because Flaming Gorge, there's a bridge that after you pass the dam, you go across. There's like a big suspension bridge.
Yeah,
we used to jump off of that.
Oh,
as
yeah.
kids, and it's high as hell.
It's really high.
It's really high, yeah. And we, when I was a kid, I used to love to cliff jump in Lake Powell, and when we go to Flaming Gorge, I would legally jump off that suspension bridge because you're not supposed to be up there. But we would pull our boat up underneath, we'd climb up, go there, and I still remember my dad saying, "I don't know, son, that looks kind of high.
All the way up
It kind of looks high," and I'm thinking, I'm going to jump off this.
And you're wore out by the time you climb up there, I bet.
It's not too bad, it's a little rock way to go up, but once you get up there, you kind of got to commit because you got to walk to the middle of the bridge and
Be the deepest part.
to the deepest part, yeah, and then you got to jump because it's not exactly, you don't want to be hanging out on that bridge in case you get somebody from the parks comes by. So you get up there, jump, and it's far enough down that you can hear the wind whistling by your ears for a few seconds before you hit that water. And when you hit it, really, it's fun.
Yeah, we joked about it. One night we were out cruising around and we pulled the hot rods over and kind of walked down under the bridge for the view. And it's like, man, that'd be a heck of a jump. I'm like, now I know somebody's who's done it. All right.
Yeah, we used to do it quite a bit. I have some pictures somewhere to prove it of us standing out there holding on to the suspension cables on the railing down. And can't imagine what that would do to my body now. But we did it quite a lot when we were growing up. Me and my brothers. So.
It's a great spot. I mean, that whole place is beautiful, especially the west end of it. Just the scenery changes so incredibly as you go up there. Well, it's cool to know that we have, a little. Yeah,
fishing, camping. Oh yeah, Flaming Gorge and Lake Powell was the definitely it for us. We loved to go camping in Flaming Gorge and whitewater raft down below the dam, fish below the dam. It was just great. I remember whitewater rafting down there. You'd get out because you kind of you get to the end where you stop, and the current is so powerful it will just push you like a rag doll. I mean, it's just you don't imagine the current being so strong, but you got to be careful because it will.
That bottom boat ramp, I've noticed every time I've done it, you're like, okay, get over here, get close.
You got to get it close.
If you miss it, it's like 30 more miles to the next boat ramp. It's quite a ways.
Yeah, you got to be prepared for that. They don't tell you that. Well, we would see otters. There's otters there down on that river. Yeah, we would see families of otters down there, river otters. Incredible. It's an incredible place, yeah.
So you're here now in Kansas. Have you? I mean, I've noticed you've been doing a lot of trips to go back to, bring more stuff from the old place. Have you got a chance to explore out here very much and go do any camping kind of stuff, or is that hopefully
no camping yet? But the natural beauty out here is just staggering to me. It's just so amazing. We just go out and drive. We'll just go out and drive.
And you're in a section that actually has a lot of nice roads. There's some of the more heavily traveled areas where the roads are starting to get a little rough, but that last 10 miles coming in here today was a little bit rough. But once you get past that, it's butter for an hour and a half, and going through the Flint Hills, just rolling and turning with the road.
Flint Hills are hills, and there's no way to really tell people about that, like we were talking before. You can't really catch it in a photograph, but when you're there in it, you just see. it's just endless rolling hills, endless green rolling hills with cows, and it just and trees and forests, and it seems like you can see forever.
Yeah.
You can't imagine being able to see that far, because everywhere else you go, there's always something obstructing your view. But in the Flint Hills, it's just you know what it reminds me of is, it reminds me of those when you go to one of those big dioramas of like a train set. And someone set up a big elaborate train set, and there's a house and there's a barn, and then there's just rolling hills and trees and train in every direction. It's as far as you can see. That's what the Flint Hills reminds me of.
There's a few sections out there that power lines are on the back side of you. If you look the other direction, you won't see a cell phone tower, a power line, or even a house. 180 degrees worth of view.
Well, supposedly the Flint Hills are like their last original prairie that's never been dug up, right? Like the Flint Hills is.
There's a lot of it that's just, has been used for cattle for 50 or 60 years, and that's the only thing that was ever done here once people really moved into the area of mass.
Right.
But there's a lot of undisturbed territory out there, except for the occasional just road cut through it, and there's an old gravel road that gets you down. Up around Manhattan area, there's Tuttle Creek Lake and Milford Lake. Both those are beautiful areas to check out. But we won't talk about too much of this on the podcast for all people who don't live in Kansas. But,
You're missing out.
So the camper project that's in the driveway, what's the long-term goal for this guy?
It's almost done. It really just needs upholstery, and it needs to have a speedometer cable attached.
Okay.
And it needs to have... it's getting air ride suspension installed.
Okay.
We're taking it down to Tennessee to have a guy do the air ride on it.
All right. And it's, the front half of it is what year?
A 55 Pontiac.
Pontiac.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where you could go in Popular Mechanics and you could, for $14, you could buy a set of plans to build your own RV. I've seen those before in those old, Popular Mechanics and Life Magazine, Time Magazine, whatever. You could find those men's journal stuff and order that kind of stuff. I don't know exactly where he did it, but the construction appears to be early to mid 60s as far as the back goes, just by the hardware that they used and put it together with. It's a lot of it is same stuff they would have used in the 50s, but it's a little bit newer. You could tell by the corrugated aluminum that they used on it.
10-year-old car.
Yep, 10-year-old car.
Cut it off at the B pillar.
Cut it off at the B pillar.
And made it into a camper. And
they still use the original chassis, because the chassis is essentially a truck chassis. I mean, they have
back then it was leaf springs and
big old Husky chassis. That's right. Leaf springs, just like a truck would be.
Exactly.
That's right.
They're very cool. I've seen a few of them over the years, but that one was the first one like that I've seen.
Yeah, I have seen one other Pontiac fairly recently. Someone tagged me in it, but it's usually Cadillacs, for whatever reason. I don't know why, but I think the plan's just, you could build your own camper out of anything that was old four-door.
Right.
You just cut off the back half of it.
There was a guy out in Hayes, Kansas, which is a couple hours west of Salina, who had 58 or so Edsel. You take the trunk lid off, and there was a camper that sat down in there.
Yeah,
so when you stood in the trunk lid, it was 6 foot tall. But from there forward, it went up to basically the windshield on top of the car. So you could pull it out and put your trunk lid back on and still put back your normal car.
That's wild.
It looked so top heavy and crazy. But he'd bring it and do the run what you bring drags. He wasn't drag racing, but he'd just drive down the drag strip and no place to go wild. And it's a neat looking project too.
Yeah, they're fun. That was a big project. I had to pull off all the aluminum off of it, every scrap. I did not think I was going to ever get all the aluminum back on that thing. But probably about 80% of the lumber underneath and the plywood was rotten because it came out of Michigan. And I knew what I was getting into. I could tell by the look of the thing that it was rough. I mean, the hood of the thing was just, the hood of the 55 Pontiac was just rotten. And you could tell it'd been outside the whole time. It was rough, but it was so cool and weird looking that I just could not resist getting it. And I'm glad to this day that I did. And it deserves to get restored and have another 50 years for people to enjoy, whether I'm here or not. I think it's one of those things that deserves to be around. So yeah, we pulled every scrap of aluminum off of it, pulled every bit of wood off of it, replaced everything rotten completely. Almost the whole thing had to be replaced. It was bad. But it was made with hardwood 2x2s. The whole thing, the skeleton of the body was hardwood 2x2s. Nice quality. You could tell a carpenter put it together because it was precise. Yeah. All the joints, everything was really done nicely. And then on the we cleaned the engine bay, cleaned the motor. We didn't pull the motor completely out, but we cleaned the engine bay really good. We cleaned the motor really good. Painted everything. I mean, it looks really nice under the hood. And as far as the body goes, we stripped the whole body down to metal and made a lot of patch panels on that puppy. I mean, it just it was a lot of rotten metal. That car is the only car I've ever done where we stripped it down to bare metal, and when you would grind on the bare metal or you would weld on the bare metal, it had a smell. Like it had a funky smell to it, like what would you like? It just stank. It was just kind of a stinky car. And so, yeah, I've never seen that before. But the extents of the rot and the abuse of the car that it went through, it permeated into the metal of the car. And you would weld, and you would be like, "What is that smell?" And it was the metal itself. And you would grind. What is that smell? Some metal. Guys kept saying that when we would work on it. I'm telling you, this car has a smell to it, and every few times we'd work on something like, what is that smell? It's this car. It's this car,
Yeah.
So hopefully we got most of that stinkiness off there because we went down to the bare metal, replaced all the rotten stuff. Yes, George Jetson.
Yeah, my dad texted me from a car show.
And so we, and then we got it down to bare metal, and then we epoxy primed it, and then high build primed it, and then we did body work from there. Me and Sean painted the car ourselves. I can handle 2-stage paint, but after that, it's a lot of my wheelhouse. But
I imagine the whole restoration process on the camper part of it's probably exactly like the Can-Am I did, where it's like, okay, what we have here is not a camper; it is a pattern to build a new camper. Because there's not enough good underneath it.
It's a rolling pattern.
Yeah, it's a 1-to-1 pattern that just happens to be assembled. It's and that's exactly what I got into. And mine wasn't terrible bad. Mine was weird where the walls were made of plywood. There was no stick build. It was actually plywood. It was built exactly like every skateboard ramp I ever built as a kid, just upside down. So
that's
plywood walls and stringers across it, and then just skinned with thin plywood.
It's interesting to see how they put it together, because they're always going for strength, but they're always going for light at the same time. And I think ours has one of those, but not both.
We were rebuilding about halfway through. And I looked at my buddy. I said, "This is exactly like all those skateboard ramps we got." So from that point on, I was like, "This is easy. We've got this."
Yeah, it is a lot of just how you think about it. When we were cutting the panels for ours, there was a lot of times where there was I'm kind of guesstimating to my best ability because there was panels that were completely just gone, missing. Right. They were completely rotted. And so there was nothing there, so you're trying to guesstimate the best, and then you put it up, and then you have to take it back and trim it. Yeah. People don't understand the amount of work that goes to that, but I used an oil-based primer to seal everything in, so each panel got sealed in oil-based primer. So I think we put a lot of work into it, but I think it'll definitely withstand it. Yeah, it'll last now. So
well, and you. Same as when I took that camper apart. Here's how this thing rotted out before.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do this and this. They didn't have Tyvek back in the day, so I literally covered the entire camper in Tyvek before I skinned it with the aluminum. So any water that got into it would run around it.
Yeah.
Versus soak in. So
yeah.
It was kind of some little things like that I tried to do just to help it have another 70 years before it needs rebuilding again.
Yeah. It's its own animal, You're kind of building a custom car that you can also poop in. It's like you're thinking of it. You're thinking of it in terms of it's a car, but it's also a house.
Yeah.
And I'm not one to poop in cars very often, but
try not to.
But it has happened. And so there's definitely considerations you have to think about especially with as much woodworking and stuff that you have to do, and you have to make sure that it's sealed and the aluminum is sealed. And
it's one thing to build a shelf,
right?
But now you're going to build a shelf attached to a car, so it's always going to be moving and flexing. So there's all those considerations that you'll take into play.
There sure is, yeah.
So you've been doing a few cars for the last few years, and I know that your heart seems to be drawn to the late '50s, early '60s Mopar type products mostly, but I mean there's been a couple. Like this Pontiac's a little deviation from that.
Sure.
Is it? Was that something that's always been on your mind, or did you come just a couple years ago just all start? Man, I really dig these.
I've always been attracted to '50s cars. I grew up in a family that was real muscle car oriented. oriented.
Yeah.
We always had Chevelles, Mustangs, Camaros, Malibus. What else? We had everything. And that seemed to be the era of choice was 60s stuff. And at some point, through being a kid and being interested in lowriders and lowrider culture and California culture, and that was just something that you gravitate to when you're a teenager growing up, and got interested into 50s cars. I think a little bit through that. Simultaneously, just a lot of people had old trucks in Utah where I grew up. So just sort of fell in love with those at the same time, and and then that got me into Classic Truck Magazine and that kind of stuff. And so my old car experience started out with classic trucks, and my dad knew that I loved classic trucks. So when I was 15 and a half, he bought me a 52 Chevrolet truck, and it was painted like the Idaho license plate. It was red, white, and blue. And I think he just thought, oh, my son's an artist, so I'm going to get him this airbrush truck, and I just loved it. I just thought it was the coolest. It was just locally famous kind of truck that was so outrageous. I just loved it, and to this day I love Advanced Design Series trucks, 48 through 54, Chevrolet GMC trucks. They just, to me, they have really cool, to me they're just the archetype of a classic truck.
Yeah. There's a buddy of mine who lives not too far from here over by Ottawa who has one of the Canopy Express ones.
Oh, those are neat.
And it's such a cool truck.
Those
the sides are open. And
those are neat. Yeah, I love those, and
first time he pulled up, I'm like, what is this? I thought he home built it or something. He started telling the story about it. Like, that is
well, they look home built. They got a big old hole cut out of the side of them with bedside stuck on
stuck
there.
in there for some reason,
Yeah, so I started out with that, with classic cars, with being interested in trucks, and then I got my first car that was a full custom build. I was 19 years old, got a 50 Merc out of Idaho. Roger Littleford was his name. Really nice guy. Yeah, he is alive to this day, and he knows. He's one of those guys that knows where every Merc is and where every Merc came from. He's a Merc. If you think you love Mercuries, Roger Littleford knows them a million times more than what you know.
Right.
He's just one of those guys that he knew everything. He just had really a lot of good advice. Well, I bought the car from him, and so that was my first full custom project. And I have a tendency to, if I do a car, I generally don't like to do the same car again.
Okay.
Which totally shows you the impractical artist nature of my mind. Because if I actually did the same car twice, I would probably make it a lot easier on myself. Not as to say I haven't. I've done a couple cab overs that are similar. They're similar year, but
different. But
in general, I tend to be drawn a little bit more to stuff that I haven't done before. But yeah, so now it's kind of like trucks and cab overs and fin cars are kind of my thing. I think about 4 or 5 years ago, my buddy James Owens, amazing automotive artist. I'm sure your listeners are familiar with him. But
he's been on a couple times.
Yeah, he's a close friend of mine. We've known each other since Los Angeles. He used to live in Burbank. We used to live in Glendale in our first shitty apartment that we had there in Glendale. And we lived a couple miles from each other, and we would go to lunch on Tuesdays. That was kind of our deal. But anyway, in Detroit, he showed me a photo on his phone. He's like, check out this car I got for Kathleen. And he shows me this car with these massive fins on it that I'd never really seen before. And it just got my heart racing. I just thought, wow, that is just cool. I thought, that's a 60s car, because 60s cars generally aren't my thing. But early 60s Mopars definitely are. They're just so outrageous. And, buddy, go see what that alarm is doing. Go shut it off. Go find it. And turn it off. Thanks, bud.
Life is happening around us as we record.
Life is happening.
We're both getting phone calls and texts and alarms.
2 sleeping dogs and alarms going off for people. Yeah, but yeah, so fell in love with that car. I says, man, if you ever want to sell that car, you call me first. And a couple of years went by, and he decided he wanted to move from Tennessee to Arizona to get a little bit drier climate for his wife. And he says, we're going to sell it, so we don't have to lug it across. I said, I'll take it. And ever since then, it's been, I think I've owned about a dozen of those Finn Mopars, the Forward Look, Virgil Exner stuff. I just can't get enough of them.
The gold wagon that my friends Tremaine and Robin own.
Yep.
Just sitting in that car, the design of it is so far beyond anything else. I mean, Ford and Chevy at the time had some really cool designs.
Yeah.
But this was just a whole different direction, it seemed like.
It seems like, the thing that really fascinates me about the forward look cars, particularly because to me the forward look, I guess technically it started in 55 and went to 61, but to me it really kind of, in 56 is when they really first started putting big fins on those cars. Yeah. So when I think about that era of cars, I think one of the parts that appeals to me is that they're complicated and simple at the same time. Their designs, their shape is extremely complicated. You've got lines and curves going in every direction, and I defy you to find more complex cars than some of those forward look cars. They're very wild. The way they're put together is quite economic.
Okay.
And thoughtful. I feel like they really thought through stuff. And as someone who's had late 50s finned cars from GM and also Mopar stuff, I could tell you that Mopar definitely seemed like they were working on a tighter budget and they had to think things through a little bit better.
Okay.
That they really had to make sure things were put together with as minimal as possible, because that 60 Chrysler, the gold one of Tremaine and Robbins, that car was highly less parts.
Okay.
And we had that car completely apart, and it's a lot of parts. There's a lot going on.
Right.
But if you compare that to like the 59 Pontiac wagon we did, I would damn near say 3 times as many parts on the Pontiac.
Look at a 58 Buick Century. There's more pieces of chrome on that car than other cars have entire pieces to the car.
Yeah.
It is
that's the stuff of nightmares when you have that before SEMA, that you got to put all those pieces back together. But yeah, I admire that because I like the thoughtfulness of the cars, because they are quite simple put together. Just the way you'd have a seat put together in there. If it was a GM, there'd be 20 parts to each seat that went in.
Right.
And Mopar stuff really had it stripped down. It was basic, and there's something very comforting about that. I think when you're building a car, is the simplicity of it, but it looks very complicated. I like that.
Okay.
That appeals to my artist brain, I think, that something can be very complex visually, but can be, relatively logically put together and simply put together.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about art. I mean, of course, I guess I mentioned cars a little bit ago. Of course, you did a couple of cars-inspired pieces. When they had released the ride, or was that before that? Yeah.
Well, strangely enough, I met the folks from Disney at Grand National Roadster Show.
Okay.
So I was in the Grand National Roadster Show. Boy, it's been 10 years ago at least. I don't know how many years ago it's been. I always have that nice spot. Alex always puts me in there at the Suede Palace, right there as you walk in.
Right at the door. Yep.
And one day she came walking in there, and she says, I'm from Disney. We're putting together a new section of the park for the movie Cars. It's going to be called Cars Land. And I said, oh, that sounds neat. She said, would you be interested in doing any kind of work for that? I says, oh, yeah, I'd love to. I mean, what kid didn't grow up with Disney,
Right.
And so I got to see the Cars Park as it was being built. I got to see behind the scenes. They took me back there, and I got to see all that. And we came up with a concept of, doing some art that was Doc Hudson racing with Lightning McQueen on the dirt track, and you could see the Cadillac Ranch fins at the back. And they sold that for years. They only recently stopped selling it in the park. And since then, I think I've done 4 car-themed pieces. One was a Flow. Also did another Doc Hudson racing from Cars 3, where he's racing with his old buddies from, I guess that would have been Tennessee, that racetrack in Tennessee. I apologize, I can't remember the name of it. But
it was so weird to be in Disneyland. And we were there in 2020, right before the pandemic hit. We're in Disneyland, and there's a couple people in front of me in one of the lines, and I'm like, she has no idea whose art she's wearing. And I was like, it's so weird to see, like, anybody else I'd ever seen with any of your art on their shirt is a car person. And, like, you could tell this person, she just wore it because she liked the picture, you know. And I was like, it was kind of cool to see the both sides of that,
Yeah.
And I never really thought about that before.
Yeah, that definitely is. It's strange when you're walking around Los Angeles and you spot a random guy wearing one of your shirts, and he doesn't know you from Adam, and it's weird. It's like someone's wearing your clothes. You see someone and you're like, hey, he's got my shirt on, and you're thinking, well, I sell my shirts all the time. So
the first time I saw somebody wearing one of my Royboy shirts, and in Austin, somebody I didn't know, it was really weird. It's like, do I go say hi? Do I say thank you for buying it? Because I'm the only one that sells it.
Or when you sell, does that
right?
make you seem like a real attention hog? And you're like, oh, I got to make sure they know who I am.
Right. I don't want to be that guy, but at the same time, thank you.
Yeah, that's that. I completely get that impulse. I really do understand.
So, well, tell me a little bit about your process when you're coming up with a new piece of artwork. Do you set and hand sketch something first? Do you immediately go to your computer? Where does it all begin for you?
Well, it all depends on the project.
Okay.
Ideally, I like to sketch things out and ink them first, and then transfer that to a metal panel and then paint that.
Okay.
But I do have projects occasionally, like Disney specific, where I will start digitally,
all right.
Which is it can be a little bit awkward to work in that process, but it saves dividends in the end. Because, if they want to make changes, it's a lot easier when it's digital.
Yeah.
If you have a painting first. So I guess the quickest answer to that is commission work. I'll start digitally because they change their mind.
Right.
They want to do something. They want to tweak things. And if I got to do that in paint, it's a pain in the butt. If
Did
it's
you
me,
use like
nope.
iPad type thing you draw on anything, or
no, I'm pretty old school. I've always just used a mouse with that when I've done all computer work. Same way with logo work. I would do. Well, that's not exactly true. When I first started doing logos for company, I was hand drawing them, and that was how we did it back then, And I was sort of that first generation to start making digital art, Back, I think I started school, my first university, I started back in 95. Yep, the end of 95. I started, and I think I got into Photoshop 1 or 2 years later. So I've been using Photoshop since about 97.
Was that where you do most of your digital stuff is in Photoshop?
No. That was just when I learned Photoshop and Illustrator. Yeah, I use both for different reasons, It depends on the thing. I find Photoshop to be the most useful if I just want to, I guess, essentially digitally sketch something. Okay. Like if I want to try a color change on something or I want to see what a top chop is going to look like. Photoshop's really useful for that, And I honestly kind of learned that from the old timers, when I would talk to guys about chopping tops and old cars, they would show me pictures. Oh, we would cut this out. And a lot of the old books did that too, like the old Tex Smith books. Yeah. They would take photos and cut the photo. I thought that was a great idea. But in my generation, we were first starting to use Photoshop. Yeah. So naturally that translated into doing things, chopping tops with chopping photos and stuff the way that the old timers would do with an actual photo. We were doing it with pixels.
When you first got into digital art, being one of the first, the right generation to come along and start doing it, do you remember there being a bunch of pushback from you whippersnappers? That's not real art, kind of thing, or?
Well, I think that stigma still is there today.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And I think a lot of that comes from you have to have the human element attached to your artwork. So, however you figure to do that, I was always taught. Was lucky to have great teachers, but my computer art teacher, when I first started out, when I was 19 or 18 years old, I don't remember how old I was when I first started using them, is, he would always say, you gotta, being an artist is the most important part.
Right.
You gotta be an artist, you gotta have a sense of design, a sense of aesthetics, and then everything else can come after that. Everything else can develop after that, and you can get better, but the computer is just a tool.
The media just conveys.
You don't want the art to be about the tool, though.
And there's been so much art that has been that over the years.
It is, and it really can kind of show, a lot of the craft mediums can convey that. Pinstriping has a way to look at that too, and I have the greatest admiration for pinstripers out there. But the part they fight with is that it can look like everybody else. So really differentiating yourself as a pinstriper and a photographer is really have it hard. They're really got to work hard because they got tons of competition, and everybody thinks they're a photographer these days with their iPhones and whatnot, but they're really working for it there. But I think something focuses on the tool versus the design, I think you run into the problem with it walking into the realm of craft. Things, if it's too much about the stuff you're using, it becomes kind of crafty. You have to consider the aesthetics and the design as your primary focus, I think. And so I think that's part of why the stigma has always been there a little bit with digital stuff, is that people think somehow you're cheating, and it can it can look stiff and rigid. You know, you have to find a way to put soul into it.
Yeah.
I've always felt like when with art and with cars, there's a similarity in the two of them, and that when you build a car and you put it together, you know, you're essentially resurrecting this car. You know, you're taking an old car that is a big piece of crap, really. I mean, if it wasn't a cool old car and you knew what it was going to be, you wouldn't want to touch it. It's a piece of crap, you know. So you go through all this work, you strip the car down, you get it down to bare metal, you take all the parts off individually, and you start putting it back together, right? So you're putting back this car, and you're modifying it, whatever, if you're a hot rod custom guy. But at some point in that process where you're putting pieces back on, I find, and I believe personally, that at some point that project obtains a soul. And I think when you get the car and you start putting it together, at some point that car gets a life, it gets a spirit. And every car is different. I've had cars where that car was nothing, just a car. It was just an inanimate object until I got the color on it. And when the color got on it, you say to yourself, that's exactly what that car was always meant to be. And that's how people remember that car. And I've had cars where I chalked the top, and suddenly that car obtained its spirit. It became alive. And I've had cars where it was when you put the glass in. When you put the glass in, suddenly there was that life to it. I've had cars when it was the upholstery. I've had cars when you lowered the car, it suddenly had its soul. And you think, shit, that car is now the car that it was always meant to be.
Do you know in that moment? Or is it something you look back a few weeks later and go, you know what?
I think I know in that moment.
Really?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that comes back to the artist thing. And it's a little bit mystical, I guess, whether or not you're a spiritual or religious person or all. But I am, and I think that things, you know, have a life to them, and you can call it an energy, whatever you want to call it. And I think old cars definitely obtain some sort of character that has a spirituality or energy to it that it didn't always have.
Right.
And I think that's a pretty cool thing, that we're able to infuse an inanimate object with that life.
I've always kind of felt like if you see the right old car just sitting in a field, sometimes it's like, I've seen 100 of these before, but that one, for some reason, is calling to me. You know, that one, for some reason, I want to see this thing done and on the road.
That's every car for me.
Well, I mean,
every car.
Probably could find.
Oh, well, I thought we were just talking about specifically 50s and 60s American cars.
No, yeah, but I mean, and if I go out and there's someone that's turned over and it's full of bullet holes and everything useful has been stripped off of it, I maybe don't feel that way about it, but I can maybe sometimes those actually take on a piece of art look to me, as they are, just what has man done to this, you know? But my brain always goes back to, you know, what was that the first person who drove this off the showroom floor? You know, what were their hopes and did they have hopes and dreams for this car? Did they have plans to do in it? You know, that
all
that's
goes back to
always in
sort
my
of
brain.
biological material at some point.
Yeah,
you know,
something tangible.
Yeah, something it degrades enough, and all the upholstery, all the vinyl, all the plastic, it all eventually crumbles, you know, and you're going in and you're hopefully, you know, bringing it back for another 50 years, but you know, left alone long enough, things degrade to a certain level, and you have to wonder if it's worth the trouble. I have one of those out on the trailer right now. I wonder if it's worth the trouble. But I can't tell you how many cars that we've saved from a scrap heap or were saved from the crusher, and a lot of cars I put a lot of money into and a lot of time into in order to get a finished car. And the conclusion I've come to with all of it is that they're worth the effort. You know, and who knows what the future holds, but I want to be one of those people that's able to stand and say that I was able to, you know, have this mystical item that comes with this history and a great story to tell, and I brought it back and gave it another chance. And it is a religious experience, I think, for me. You know, you're resurrecting something that is long gone.
Yeah. Other people have abandoned it.
Other people have abandoned it and see no value in it. And I think it's a certain type of person, I think, that can see the value, the inherent value in certain things that other people have forgotten.
And there's probably something to it that us as humans, we love redemption stories.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if someone has gone astray and then they come back and make things right, we love those stories for some reason. I feel the same way about cars. And there was a house I passed here on the way today I forgot about until I saw it today. At one time, it was literally just half a foundation stuck in the side of a hill.
Wow.
It was old, 18, cowboy days, 1880s kind of just rocks. And someone has bought the property and they built a house there, and that is still,
that's cool.
It's built into the side of the hill, so that's still a half of the house. And you can see that rock that's been there for 120 years.
I love that history. And that was another part that drove us out of California, was that I think that the love of the old and the history is pushed to the wayside a lot of the time in California. And that's all I want, is I want to be...
New, better, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, but people's idea of better is terrible. They think of better as just being new, and they're not the same thing. New doesn't necessarily make something better. You kind of got to start with some older stuff sometimes to make something newer and better.
It probably goes back to that some of that digital art that was just lost in the digital part of it. It was not art to begin with.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that in what's going on today. It's like, let's just do this because it's quick, easy, we can make a buck. And it's not about, no, this needs to have some intrinsic value. And I see that in old like buildings. If I drive by some old decrepit gas station, man, that'd be cool to bring that back.
Sure, absolutely.
It's 30 miles from anywhere. It'd be useless, but it'd be cool to see it.
Well, our house here in Kansas has relics from our past 3 houses.
Oh, yeah?
We always take something from the house that we left, or it's been set aside as an extra or something that whatever, and then we bring it with us, and we like today I'm installing handles in our bedroom that are from our previous house that the guy that purchased it. I'm going to gut this. You can have anything you want. So we end up keeping the hardware for it, and it's vintage 1950s hardware, stuff that somebody who wants to flip a house doesn't care about, but I care about. And so I like to hold on to those items, and even if I don't use them until later, it's great to have them when you need them.
I mean, a bunch of drawer pulls could always make their way into a grill, too.
That's true. And they'd be built right, too. They'd be made out of solid metal. They'd have the correct plating on it, none of the cheap stuff.
Not the stuff you're going to go pick up at your local big box store today.
That's right.
Well, I'm glad you guys have moved out here to Kansas and found maybe a little more long-term sustainable pace of life.
Yeah.
Like I said, we were talking in Tulsa. You're 2 hours from Tulsa.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's an airport there. It's a pretty decent airport. You're 2 hours from Wichita. There's international airport there. You're 2 hours or so from Kansas City.
I can go down to Oklahoma. Did we say Tulsa?
Yeah.
Tulsa's right there.
Just not too far away. I assume that from your place to LAX in California, some days could be just as long of a drive.
You're damn straight it could have been, yeah.
So, I mean...
Yeah, if traffic's perfect, it's an hour away. If it's not, it could be 3 hours plus, one direction.
Right, and if there's bad traffic here, it's going to add 3 minutes to your trip.
That's right. Yeah, we like being centrally located, There's something about Kansas, Kansas to me really speaks to the beginning of the West. The jumping off point, I think they put that somewhere around Independence, Missouri, where they have the trails going to the Oregon Trail. They have California and the Santa Fe Trail. I think that was the trail name, the 3 main trailheads. But that jumping off point was right there, So in my mind, what I've learned is in the way people talk around here, the kind of the attitude, the kind of the swagger that people have, is it's a very, very Western feel here. To me, Kansas really is like the beginning of the West, and I like that, and I like the history associated with that.
I've always felt that Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, they, to me, have always significantly felt different than even Iowa, Missouri.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, just that little bit of east to west.
Yeah.
And then, but kind of that point of the beginning of the West, every town in Kansas pretty much existed because that was for a year as far as the railroad went.
Right, that's right.
They
stopped and they set up a town, and
so Abilene was a huge cow town, and then a year or two later, Ellsworth was a huge cow town. Just because that railroad went that much further, and then the people who moved to the town didn't like the cattle being run there, so they just ran them to the next town instead. Because they never lived there yet.
Well, that speaks to the spirit of the West. That sort of ingenuity to make it a little bit farther. And I think that's something. Anybody who's a hot rod or a custom car builder or even an artist, I think they think of themselves as a pioneer of some sort, and I think that's part of why this area appeals to me, is it sort of does have that sort of old time feel, that adventure, that pioneer spirit, that can-do-itiveness.
The go west, young man.
The go west, yeah, for sure. I think that definitely is here.
Well, I think it's a good place to stop it for now. I'm sure we'll do another one of these one day. But thanks for letting me come sit in your house and talk with you for a little bit. And again, welcome to Kansas. And we had a little snow here this year, so
yeah, I hope all your listeners will make it a point to come to Kansas. It's a really beautiful place that you've all not thought about.
Well, yeah, you've got the big KKOA show that happens in July every year, with the exception of the fact that it's usually 105 degrees.
Yeah, that's the only thing bad people that people say is bad about it is the heat.
So the heat is pretty rough there, but that's a great show to come to if you've never been. And it's nice because there's interstates entering that town from 4 directions, so you can come from north, south, east, or west and get there. Just across the border in Oklahoma, the Stray Cat 500, a lot of really great people go to that car show down there. So there's a handful of shows in the area that you can come to and you can check out, and you can actually see some of the scenery of Kansas, because if you're on the interstate, you'll get there.
Yeah.
But if you're on these 2-lane roads, there's going to be antique stores, and there's going to be cool stuff to see. And that little town of Yates Center still has the drive-in movie screen up, but it's been a junkyard for as long as I can remember.
Right.
So it's a salvage yard that still has the screen from when it was a drive-in. It's just so cool. There's tons of cool stuff in there, but tons of things to go look at, and I hope you get to enjoy all that and enjoy the new life here in Kansas.
Thanks, man. Appreciate your time. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
It was a really lot of fun to sit down and talk with Max, and then to go out to lunch with his family and just had a good time. And it's so cool to know that he's just a couple hours away now. So hopefully get to see him on a lot more shows. So this last weekend, I did something kind of new to me. I did what's called a rumble. The Elder Rodders Car Club in El Dorado, Kansas, was challenged by the Over the Road Gang Car Club in Ottawa, Kansas. Now, the Over the Road Gang puts on a really cool car show in September every year. It's a pretty big event, and I've got some information in the show notes, the links to where you can find more information about that show. It's pretty cool, but what it means is they've got a giant list of people they can draw from. So we were a little bit nervous. I say we, the El Dorados are going to be an unofficial member for a day, and we're a little bit nervous about how many people they could pull. It was cool, though, in the end. So what it is 2 car clubs pick a town that's in between them. Whoever brings the most cars to that town wins. And this event, this time, because somebody's car was broken, somebody's Galaxy was broken, this event was a tie. Literally had 58 or 59 cars per town. And this guy that's talking right now is the loser who could have won it for his side, but his car is broken. Finally, the damage from the 48 state trip from the rockers not being put on the shafts correctly before the trip. Finally, that damage, I think, has come all the way home, and I'm down by at least 1 cylinder. Really, actually, I think 2. They're just super oiled, and probably just valve guides on that side of the head, because we didn't do all of them because we only had so many when we were doing repair on the trip. I hope that's all that's wrong. We'll see. I've got to get a compression test and leak down test done and find out what's going on with it, and then try to get it fixed before I need the car, which is in like 5-6 weeks is when I need the car. Ain't gonna happen. Anyways, I was talking about the Rumble Run. I got sidetracked with my own BS. The Rumble was a blast. We had a really good time driving through the hills of Kansas, heading to Olpe, Kansas to have some chicken at the Olpe Chicken House. Like I said, 58, 59 cars per team showed up, and we kind of just completely overran the little downtown area of Olpe, Kansas. And it was a really good time. We got to see a lot of old friends that I haven't seen for a very long time, and just can't describe how good it was to be out driving in a bunch of cool old hot rods for the day. I got to ride in one. So there's no car on my side, but I got to ride with my buddy Randy in his 32, and it was a blast. Actually kind of nice to sit and talk with somebody instead of just being by myself in the car. Unfortunately, Vanessa had to work on this that Saturday, so I'm under strict instructions to not send pictures or videos while I'm having fun with cars while she's working on Saturday. That's a no-no. So I kind of was trying to keep everything pretty quiet and not really let her know how much fun we were having. And hopefully next time she gets to go. So that's what a Rumble is. And I'm going to encourage you to do one from your town. So call up somebody from another town that you know that's got a few buddies with hot rods and custom cars Pick a little town in between. Maybe there's one with a junkyard or cool antique shops, or just a great place to hang out and have a beer and have some good food. Pick someplace cool in between, somewhere you can both have some cool roads to get there, and challenge your buddy to say, okay, whoever brings the most cool custom cars and hot rods to this town on this day wins the Rumble. I want to hear about it if you do it, okay? I want to know where you went. I want to see pictures. I want to see video, whatever. I want you to fill the rest of the world in on what kind of fun you have with your cars. This is a great way to get the cars out and exercise them and get to see some scenery and go eat some places you've never been before and probably see some friends you haven't seen for a couple years. Really, that's about it for this episode. I had a blast. I hope that you get to go do the same thing. And welcome to Kansas, Mr. Max. I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and talk to me. Until next time, folks, stay safe, don't die, and I'll see you at a show. Thanks for listening to another episode of Chrome Pipes and Pinstripes. If you got to this point, that means you listened to the whole show, and I appreciate that. So I want to throw one thing out here. If you dig what I do with these podcasts, you dig what I do with royboyproductions.com, please consider going over to patreon.com/royboyproductions. patreon.com/royboyproductions. That's where, if you feel like it, you can say, hey, you know what? I'll throw Royboy $1 a month or $5 a month or $10 a month because I appreciate what he does. Talking about myself in the third person sounds really weird. So, forgive me for all the weirdness here. If you dig what I do, please come over here and help support what I do because it takes a lot of money to go to these events, to stay in the hotels, to buy this expensive equipment. All of my equipment is getting pretty old. So the podcast recorder right now is held together with just prayer. I think that's the only thing making it continue to work. And I will need to buy a new one at some point this year, and they're quite pricey. So I'm not trying to complain, just saying thank you for all the people who have helped me over the years by buying hats and shirts and stuff. I'll have new shirts out this year. And in the meantime, you can go over to royboyproductions.com, check out all the stuff I have there. If you feel like throwing a couple dollars a month at me, I really would appreciate it. It's patreon.com/royboyproductions. And I'll work out some stuff that the people who donate there get a little bit of heads up and get some stuff ahead of time. All right. Thanks for listening. Have yourself a great day. Bye-bye now. Well, somebody's got to ride this dinosaur.